from Isaiah chapter 14. And you gotta get the context for this to really land. This isn't some dry historical report. No. What the prophet Isaiah is doing here is basically handing the newly freed people of Judah the lyrics to a victory song. But it's more than that. It's a taunt. It's this incredibly powerful piece of poetry designed specifically to mock their former captors and celebrate the end of their long, brutal bondage. Okay, so you hear this phrase, the Golden City, and you might wonder, where does that come from? Well, it's not just some random poetic nickname. It's actually a direct callback to a super famous vision from the book of Daniel. In that dream, the whole Babylonian Empire was represented by a head of pure gold. And that image, it just perfectly captured its incredible wealth and its shiny, powerful image to the rest of the world. And here's another really crucial point. This taunt song isn't just aimed at one guy. We might immediately think of a big name like Nebuchadnezzar, but it's bigger than that. The target here is the entire Babylonian dynasty, the whole institution of the throne. A dynasty, by the way, that ended in the most dramatic way possible with its very last king, Belshazzar, on that famous night he saw the writing on the wall. To really feel the shock of Babylon's fall, you have to understand what this place was. According to the ancient historian Herodotus, the city walls were, get this, 336 feet high. To put that in perspective, that's taller than a modern 30-story building. And they weren't just tall, they were so wide you could apparently race 4 chariots side by side on top of them. This place was engineered to be literally unconquerable, which is what makes its sudden overnight capture by Cyrus the Great so absolutely stunning. All right, moving on to verse 5. This just builds on that sense of total collapse, but listen to the language. It's so absolute, so final. It doesn't say the staff is, bent or the scepter is maybe a little cracked. No, it says they are broken. That's not just a military defeat, folks. That's the definitive, irreversible end of their power. Game over. And we have to remember, these weren't just fancy sticks. The staff and the scepter were the ultimate symbols of a king's authority. They represented their very right to rule. So to say they're broken, that's like saying the entire foundation of the empire has been shattered into a million pieces. The message couldn't be clear. The Babylonian dynasty is done, for good. Okay, so in verse 6, the poem kind of shifts gears. It's not just about what happened anymore, the fall, it's about why it feels so right. We get this chilling portrait of a cruel, relentless oppressor, and then, in this incredible turn of cosmic justice, the tables are completely flipped. The persecutor is now the one being persecuted, and there's absolutely no one around to help them. And the language here is just so vivid, isn't it? Let's break it down. A continual stroke. That speaks to this relentless, nonstop oppression. Then you have ruled in anger, which paints this picture of a dominion that was just cruel and wrathful. And the result of all that? Well, now that same power is persecuted, and their conquerors, the Medes and Persians, are totally unstoppable. The tables haven't just turned, they've been thrown across the room. And then we get to verse 7, and the whole mood just changes on a dime. It's a dramatic shift. After all that violence and collapse, it's like the poetic camera just pulls back to show us the aftermath. And what do we see? The whole world, which had been groaning under Babylon, is suddenly at peace. It's quiet. And that quiet is finally broken, not by the sound of war, but by singing. Now, when the text says the whole earth, are we literally talking about the entire planet? Well, of course not. This is a classic, powerful literary device called hyperbole. What the whole earth really means here is the vast known world that was under Babylon's thumb. All those nations that had been crushed by its continual stroke. They can finally breathe a collective sigh of relief. This brings us to verse 8, and honestly, this might be my favorite part of the whole passage, because the celebration becomes so big, so all-encompassing, that it actually goes beyond just people. In this beautiful use of personification, nature itself gets in on the party. The fir trees and the legendary cedars of Lebanon, they all join in the joyful song. But that makes you stop and think for a second, right? Why on earth would trees be rejoicing? I mean, what does a forest care about the fall of a king? Well, the answer is just brilliant, because it's a metaphor that's actually rooted in literal truth. See, ancient kings, especially from Assyria and Babylon, they used to brag, like in their official records, about leveling the forests of the nations they conquered. They would clear-cut those amazing cedars of Lebanon for their massive building projects. So the king of Babylon wasn't just a metaphorical feller who cut down kingdoms, he was a literal feller, a woodcutter who cut down their forests. Now that the feller is gone, the forests, just like the people, can finally rest and grow without fear. And that, right there, is the incredible takeaway. The whole point is that the tyranny of Babylon was so awful, so destructive, that its fall wasn't just a political event. It was a cosmic one. The celebration had to be universal. It wasn't just for people. The entire created world, from the oppressed nations right down to the trees, is rejoicing that peace has finally been restored.
So let's walk through verses 9 to 14 together and see how this whole drama really unfolds.
So the story kicks off not up in heaven or even on earth, but down in the underworld, what they called Sheol. And as the king finally dies and makes his descent, well, it seems there's a pretty unique welcoming party waiting for him.
What I love about verse 9 is how the underworld itself is a character in this story. It's not just some static place, it's an active participant. It's described as being moved, like it's stirred into a frenzy, getting ready to throw a sarcastic welcome home party for its newest and most famous resident.
And check out this greeting committee. Sheol literally stirs up the spirits of the chief ones of the earth. Yep, the very same kings this monarch defeated and killed. In this amazing reversal of fortune, their ghosts are now rising from their shadowy thrones to greet their former oppressor. This is no honor guard, this is payback, and it's just getting started.
And then in verse 10, they hit him with a big taunt. You can almost hear the disbelief and the mockery in their voices. Wait, you? The guy who made the world tremble? You're weak now? Just like us? They just can't believe the great and mighty king has been brought down to their pathetic level. Verse 11 paints this absolutely gruesome picture of just how far he's fallen. All his pop, his royal luxury, the music that filled his courts, it's all gone. And what's left? Silence. His fancy bed of fine linens? It's now a bed of maggots. His warm silken blankets are now a tangled covering of worms. It's the ultimate degradation, a total wipeout of his status.
Okay, now let's get to the verse at the very heart of this whole thing. This is where that famous name shows up. But again, context is everything, because it's not a name, it's a nickname, it's a metaphor.
So here it is, verse 12. How art thou fallen from heaven? Now this is crucial. In this context, heaven doesn't mean the home of God and the angels, it means the heights of human and political power. And look at the imagery. He's not just fallen, he's cut down to the ground like a giant imposing tree. It signals a final, permanent end to his reign.
And this, right here, is the key that unlocks the whole thing. The word we translate as Lucifer comes from the Hebrew word Hillel, which means shining one or light bearer. You know what it was the name for? The planet Venus, the morning star. The king of Babylon in all his glory was like that dazzlingly bright star in the morning sky. So his fall from power was as shocking and dramatic as watching that star suddenly just fall out of the sky. It's poetry, a symbol, not a proper name for a person. So why did he fall? The song now shifts from describing what happened to the king to explaining why it happened. And the reason is a tale as old as time. Pure, unfiltered, blasphemous arrogance, which is summed up perfectly in 5 incredibly bold statements.
In verses 13 and 14, you can literally see him climbing a ladder of arrogance. Each I will is another step up in his own mind. First he says, I will ascend into heaven, kind of like the Tower of Babel story. Then, I will exalt my throne above the stars, basically saying he's better than all other kings. Then he claims he'll sit on the Mount of the Congregation, the mythical home of the gods, and then ascend above the clouds. It all builds to this final, fatal declaration. I will be like the Most High. And that's the pride that comes before the fall. That seals his fate.
So you have to be asking, if this was just a poem about a human king, how on earth did it become the defining story of the devil? Well, this is where we get to see the incredible power of a metaphor, and how it can take on a life of its own.
What's so fascinating is that this theme, this idea of a prideful fall from a great height, becomes a recurring pattern. You see it here in Isaiah 14 with Babylon's king. Then in Ezekiel 28, the arrogant king of Tyre is described in language that makes him sound like a cherub being cast out of Eden. These powerful metaphors for fallen human kings basically created a blueprint, an archetype. So later, when the writer of Revelation needed language to describe the fall of Satan, this pattern was already there, ready to be used for the story of a literal war in heaven. The story of arrogant men became the template for the legend of the devil. And that really leaves us with something incredible to think about, doesn't it? It just goes to show you how language works, how stories grow and change over time, and how a poetic insult originally aimed at one man's pride could echo through the centuries to shape our entire understanding of good, evil, and what it truly means to fall from grace.
Isaiah chapter 14, verse 15 gets straight to the point. It delivers the punchline to the king's cosmic ambitions right from the get-go.
Yet thou shalt be brought down to hell, to the sides of the pit. You got to remember, just a few verses before this same king was boasting things like, I will ascend into heaven, I will be like the Most High. Well, this single line just slices right through all that arrogance. It's a prophecy that basically says, hey, despite all your self-worship, this is your final stop.
Now, it's really important we get the language here. The source material makes it clear that hell, or the pit, isn't just about some spiritual afterlife. It's referring to Sheol, which means the grave. So this symbolizes a complete and total fall from power, an irreversible plunge from this great height into, well, absolute nothingness. He's not just beaten, he's basically erased from his high and mighty status.
So the king has fallen. But the story, it doesn't just end there. Isaiah does something brilliant. He shifts the camera, so to speak. He moves from the king's fate to the reaction of the people who are left to see what's happened. So you have to wonder, how would a world that once trembled before this guy react to seeing him in the pit?
And that brings us to the second act of this little drama, which we find in verse 16. We go from the judgment itself to the pure astonishment of the people watching. I mean, these are the people from the nations he conquered, the ones who lived in fear of his power. And now they get to see him in his final state.
The imagery here is just so powerful. They narrowly look at him, like they have to squint to peer really close because they just can't believe what they're seeing. The source describes this change as something so profound it seems next to impossible. And just listen to the tone of their question. Is this the man that made the earth tremble? It's not even mockery, it's just pure, unadulterated shock. The man they were terrified of is now an object of total disbelief.
And this slide, wow, it just captures that stunning contrast perfectly, doesn't it? On one hand, you've got the king of Babylon, the ruler of the Golden Empire, a wonder of the ancient world that stood for 3 whole centuries. And on the other, what's left? A humbled, wretched figure, so diminished he's barely even recognizable. It's the ultimate demotion, from a world shaker to a cautionary tale you can barely even see.
And now we get to the final piece of the prophecy, right here in verse 17. After the fall, after the shocked reaction, the text gives us the reason. This is the moral justification for this huge reversal, and it's delivered as a final verdict right from the mouths of the onlookers themselves.
This verse, it's framed like a rhetorical question, but let's call it what it is. It's a list of criminal charges. This is the final indictment against him, spelling out exactly why he deserved this fate.
And the charges are specific. First, he made the world as a wilderness. The source actually points to real historical events, like the absolute destruction of Jerusalem in 587 BC as a perfect example of this. Second charge, he opened not the house of his prisoners. This is talking about his refusal to free captive nations. For the people of Judah, this meant a 70-year captivity in Babylon. So, you see, these weren't abstract crimes. They were real policies that caused enormous suffering.
But first, let's start with a question to really set the stage here. What do you think a king's greatest shame is? I mean, for rulers who spend their lives building empires and massive monuments, legacy is everything, right? The goal is to be remembered forever in glory. So it makes sense that the greatest possible shame would be the total opposite, to be erased, forgotten, and dishonored, especially in death. And that is exactly the fate we're about to explore. And this slide right here, it just perfectly captures the heart of the whole passage. On one side, you have the standard for pretty much every other king. They lie in glory, each in their own tomb. But on the other side, you have the shocking fate of the king of Babylon. He's just cast out, denied even a grave. So this is the central mystery we're unpacking today. Why was his end so different? To really grasp the depth of this dishonor, we first have to understand the honor he was denied. So this first section is all about the standard for a royal burial, which is what makes what happened to the king of Babylon so utterly shocking. Okay, let's start with verse 18. The text sets a baseline for us. All the kings of the nations lie in glory, every one in his own house. Now, this house he's talking about, that's their tomb, their sepulcher. These were often stately monuments built to honor their memory and lock in their legacy for all time. This was just the universal expectation for royalty. Now, this prophecy isn't just floating in the abstract. It has a likely historical anchor. Many scholars believe this passage is pointing right at Belshazzar, the last king of Babylon. You see, he was killed the very night the city was conquered by Cyrus the Great. And in the absolute chaos of a city falling, there would have been zero time for a fancy royal burial. And let's be honest, the victorious Persians certainly weren't going to go out of their way to give him one. All right, moving on, the prophecy really starts to intensify. It goes from just the absence of a tomb and zooms right in on the visceral, graphic details of the king's physical body. It paints a really powerful and, frankly, grim picture. So verse 19 kicks off with this incredibly potent metaphor. The king's body is like an abominable branch. So what does that mean? Just imagine a rotten, diseased branch being pruned from a tree. It's not just cut off. It's seen as worthless, disgusting, something you get rid of so it doesn't infect the rest of the tree. It's cast aside to be burned. That's the image here. And the prophecy just keeps layering on these images. He's compared to the raiment of those that are slain, so like the bloody, torn-up, worthless rags stripped from a corpse on a battlefield. And then it gets even worse. He is as a carcass trodden under feet. His body is just left out, unburied, trampled into the mud. I mean, you can't get much more desecrated than that. So, the big question is, why? Why this horrific fate? Well, verse 20 gives us the answer, straight up. He's denied a place among the other kings because of his own actions. It says he was a tyrant who destroyed thy land and slain thy people. So his punishment is the direct, and you could say fitting, consequence of his crimes. And this is a really crucial point. This isn't just about a dishonored body. It's about the complete and total erasure of a legacy. The text is very explicit. The seed of evildoers shall never be renowned. Their name, their memory, it's all going to be wiped out. The dishonor actually extends beyond death to completely obliterate their entire historical footprint. So, this idea of a wiped-out legacy brings us to the next stage of the prophecy, because the curse, it doesn't just stop with the king. Nope, it extends to his children and his entire family line, making sure that his evil dynasty is brought to a permanent final end. Verse 21 is just chilling. It commands, "Prepare slaughter for his children for the iniquity of their fathers." The imagery here is of a slaughterhouse, as if his descendants are being lined up to be slain. This isn't just a political defeat we're talking about, it's a generational extermination. And the consequences of this slaughter are spelled out with just devastating clarity. First, they shall not rise, meaning their political power is broken forever. Second, they shall not possess the land, so their inheritance is gone. And third, they shall not fill the world with cities, which makes sure their cultural influence is utterly extinguished. Verse 22 really drives home the totality of this judgment. The declaration is to cut off from Babylon the name and remnant and son and nephew. You hear that echo of the abominable branch being cut off? It's the same idea. Every single trace of the royal lineage, every potential heir, every memory is to be completely removed from existence. So, from the king's corpse to his children, the prophecy now expands to its widest possible scope, the very land of Babylon itself. The curse becomes environmental, literally transforming a great empire into a desolate wasteland. The prophecy says that Babylon will become a possession for the bittern. Now, nobody's 100% sure what animal a bittern is, but scholars agree it's some kind of creature you'd find in desolate, ruined places. Think porcupines or owls. The main point is that the once mighty capital city will become a habitat for wild animals, a symbol of its complete and total ruin. The text also mentions pools of water, which has a really stunning historical fulfillment. When Cyrus conquered Babylon, his army famously diverted the Euphrates River to get into the city. Well, historical sources suggest the water never fully returned to its original channel, leaving huge parts of the region permanently flooded and marshy, exactly as the prophecy foretold. It's pretty incredible. And now for the final and I think most amazing image, the besom of destruction. So what is a besom? It's basically an old-fashioned broom, the kind made of twigs tied to a stick, like a classic witch's broom. The image here is of a divine hand literally sweeping the land clean, just removing every single trace of Babylon's civilization, leaving absolutely nothing behind. The final line from verse 23 just lands with incredible force. I will sweep it with the besom of destruction, saith the Lord of hosts. This makes it crystal clear. This wasn't just some accident of history or a simple military defeat. The prophecy frames this as a deliberate, total, and final act of divine judgment. So, what's the ultimate takeaway from all this? These 6 verses depict a fall that is so absolute that nothing is left. Not a tomb, not an heir, not a city, not even a name. It's a really powerful meditation on tyranny, on justice, and on the ultimate fragility of any legacy that's built on cruelty and evil.